Welcome to Voice with Vielka, a podcast dedicated to the ongoing quest for finding how to best teach kids to sing with confidence. I'm your host, Vielka, and I'll share my experiences as a performer, educator, founder, and mother for the last 20 years here in the heart of New York City. Thank you for joining me as I share with you the amazing people, practices, and talking points to help us grow together as singers, educators, entrepreneurs, and human beings. We know that the voice is more than just a physical instrument. It's a reflection of our inner world, which carries unspoken stories and emotions into the voice studio. How can we honor the emotional journey of our students while guiding their vocal growth? How can we create a space where their voices feel heard, understood, and supported? I'm so excited and honored to have with us today a guest whose work embodies a mindful and holistic approach to voice care and teaching. A dedicated voice faculty member at the University of Louisville, she is a singing voice specialist who deeply integrates trauma-informed care into her pedagogy. She facilitates yoga voice, life force yoga, transcending sexual trauma through yoga, and movement for trauma, weaving a unique blend of art, science, and healing into her practice. In her role as the education director of the Voice and Trauma Research and Connection Group, founded by Dr. Lisa Monti, she is at the forefront of creating spaces where voices can be nurtured and heard with care. She is also recognized as a vocologist with the Pan American Vocology Association. Her expertise, rooted in a Master of Music in Voice Pedagogy and Performance, guides her thoughtful approach to supporting the whole person behind the voice. Join us as we explore this deeper conversation, delving into the intersection of voice, healing, and embodied practice. I'm so excited and honored to have with us today, Megan Durham. Megan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Vielka. What an intro. Wow. It's very humbling. Thank you.
Well, I find the work that you do really humbling, and I think probably one of my first questions for you is, when did you start singing and how did that find its way into the work that you do?
Sure. Thank you so much for asking. I will say, I mentioned to you before we started recording, but I've got some allergies today. So for folks listening, if I'm a little today, that's we're presencing that allergies are also with us in this space today. Um, both of my parents are musical. My mother is an extraordinarily gifted pianist. My father is a beautiful tenor. And from a young age, I grew up really singing in church. I mean, I think I learned, a heart to sing harmony, to sing parts, and really to read music by, the hymnal. And there's a lot of both and there for me as well, in terms of, uh, well, talking about church is, yeah, there's a lot there in terms of my past and the both and of loving the music and also not totally in alignment with my values with in some of the ways that I was brought up in that world. And I really value the community aspect of singing, and that's still a really important part of my life and part of my roots, particularly growing up in Southwest Virginia, which I'll name right now. We're seeing such devastation in Appalachia after the hurricane. And my heart goes out because I have such fond memories of folk singing, folk music, just so much sort of culture embedded in that land. And that really brought me where I am today. So definitely singing in church. Also, I was a band nerd for a long time. I was a percussionist. I was a drum major. I had like a sequiny outfit. It was awesome. So I did. I would say like I guess where I would go with that though is my instrumental background. I find extremely helpful now as a singer. Just really melding those two musical modalities together. I don't play the drums anymore. That don't I don't do that anymore. That's like a long time ago.
Oh, that's amazing. So I'm getting this picture of you just kind of growing up around music and also in church. And I think that's true for a lot of us, which is
Yeah,
really
yeah,
cool
yeah.
to know that's how your story began. And yeah, I was so fortunate to bump into you. Well, not bump into you, to choose your presentation
Ah,
amongst many at the NATS conference this year that was held in Knoxville, Tennessee, this past, I guess that was the end of June, beginning of July. And I just immediately knew after I was there in your session, I was like, oh, I've got to ask Megan if she'll be on the show because you have such an amazing, calming, grounding presence in addition to obviously the topics that you were talking about. And as I was reviewing my notes today to speak with you, I was like, wait, what? You were in three different presentations at the NATS conference this year. I only got to be at one of them, but I have time to go back, I'm sure, and listen to the recordings. So I just wanted to share with the audience and maybe have you kind of explore a little bit about those topics, and I'm sure we'll weave in some of your specialties along the way.
yeah.
So let's start with the first one, which I think was the one that I was in. What's my line? Empowering
Uh-huh.
teachers to honor student experiences through language, choice, and agency. And
Um,
you spoke a lot about trauma informed care. For
yeah.
those listening who this is kind of a new world we're walking into and new language, which I
Mhm.
think it is pretty relatively new, tell us what that means to you.
Yes, thank you for asking. The first thing I will present is also my wonderful colleague, Carol Kruzmark, who facilitated this with me. And I'm so inspired by her work in this area as a speech pathologist. So there are so many maybe ways that we could talk about trauma informed care. The first thing is perhaps defining what trauma is. And again, we could spend a day doing that. A couple threads that I'll pull though, that I think resonate with a lot of people. Trauma, this is from Stephen Porges's work. Trauma is a chronic disruption in connectedness, where we want so desperately to make connections with other people, with basic needs, but we are thwarted because of an instinct to survive. So we are unable to make those connections. And I think particularly during the height of lockdown, we saw this a lot from millions of people, particularly artists who lost so many things, including livelihood, and sort of went into this feeling of numbness or futility. What's the point? That kind of thing. Another thing that I think of is when our capacity, so certainly trauma can be anything that we experience as, this comes from Resma Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, which if you take maybe one resource from today on this work, I would really recommend My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem. In this book, he talks at length about trauma is anything that is too much, too soon, or too fast. So it could be an event, though it's not the event itself, it's perhaps do we have access to resources to help us move through that event in our bodies? Do we have community to help us feel supported through these events? And if not, again, and this is not, it's totally out of our control. It's completely out of our conscious control. Very often our body can become sort of perhaps habituate. Language is often hard with this, and this is a little bit of actually this topic where it's very hard to talk about trauma because it's so unique. We can talk about general ideas, but for example, words like even the word trauma itself, right, may feel really uncomfortable for somebody. So I really am presence that, as you're listening, as anybody listening today, if you're hearing me speak and something doesn't feel right for you, let's validate that. So much of this work is about, I live with this kind of thing a lot. I research, I think about this, but I'm not an expert on anyone's experience but my own. And I think really approaching this whole topic with humility rather than assumption is so key. So when we have these traumatic experiences, and the other thing I'll name is access or lack of access to resource. privilege is such a huge part of trauma-informed care, where if we don't have access to resources and we are chronically stuck in having to vie against connection or survival, very often trauma, what we might call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, can occur for folks. Trauma-informed care. There's a great article by authors Perky, Patel, and Phillips that I cite a lot. And in this article, they talk about how trauma-informed care is not trauma-specific care. So I'm not assuming that folks coming into my studio have trauma. I'm not assuming that if they have an emotional, some sort of heightened emotional reactivity, I'm not assuming that that's a trauma response. We don't know. That could be a very normal part. There's a lot of things about being human that are hard, that are not trauma. And that I think needs to be really underscored, because I think particularly in social media discourse around mental health, it becomes really easy to get away from the nuance of these topics. And not everything that is hard is traumatic. We are not traumatized. You know, that sometimes people, I'm traumatized, and sort of use these words flippantly, but they really devalue and really take away from the folks they've experienced for whom this is a very real part of their life. So trauma-informed care, my friend Carol often says, it's universal precaution. It's being aware that this exists. The stats are at least 1 in 6 folks coming into your studio will have suffered trauma. My colleague Elisa Monti in their Voice and Research Connection group has, that's really where the stat comes from, that it's more likely that someone walking into a voice session has sustained abuse than that they're left-handed. So we know that this is happening. How can we educate ourselves about the prevalence and then have some tested, I hesitate a little bit to use the word evidence-based, because in so much of this, there really is no evidence other than the people's lived experience. So in sort of narrative medicine, we might say we're listening to stories and we're having resources to hold more compassionate spaces, so that it's more about my capacity as a practitioner to notice my reactivity when something is coming up, and to be able to be with my feelings of judgment, my bias, my what's going on in the space. How can I think more skillfully about the way I'm offering, let's say, technical work? If I'm noticing that there's a body sharing the space with me that's having some emotional or physical reactivity, again, I don't know that it's trauma, but if I'm trauma informed, I might have some specific guidelines about how I proceed in the space in general. And so that, gosh, that's a lot. And it probably brings up more questions than answers, but I actually think that's what this work is. We don't really have a lot of answers. It's learning to be in the discomfort of not knowing, which is really hard for voice folks, because we love our tools, and I love tools too. But it can be really hard.
It is really hard, and it's so much to unpack. And at the same time, I want to recognize that we're really giving words for things that I think were invisible and not talked about for a very long time. And just starting there maybe is kind of a reflection of what you're saying, of the work is first off just becoming aware
Totally.
of the possibilities, and this idea of universal precaution is really interesting. But what I also found interesting, what you just said, is that rather than thinking more about the person in front of you and what may or may not happen, which we really aren't going to know, right? That is, let's be clear, we are not therapists as voice teachers. So we're not getting into that. But really what I heard you say was, it's noticing what comes with it up for ourselves as voice teachers, and then pausing and really digging deeper and saying, is this the bias? Are there other ways I should be thinking about this? What's maybe like a typical sort of easy example in a very uneasy topic that will kind of help show what that might look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I go to often is how does voice pedagogy shift? If we consider that things that have often been labeled vocal faults or technical issues might actually be survival strategies for
I
bodies.
have to pause you for a second because I actually highlighted and I have it here in my notes to talk about because when I read this on your website, it really hit me like, oh my gosh, I have never thought of it that way. And what I read was, yeah, how does voice pedagogy shift when we consider that responses labeled vocal faults like gasping for air, anxiety, lethargy, maybe
Mhm.
survival strategies. Just reiterating that, like, oh my goodness,
Yeah,
that's really
yeah.
expansive, like expanding my mind anyway.
Well, thank
Yeah, tell
you.
us more. And how did you come
Well,
upon that?
yeah, well, and to be really clear, survival strategy is normal. That doesn't mean that anyone has trauma, but I do think that if we think about bodies as bodies are vast. We cannot be reduced to nervous system models. And nervous system models can be really helpful in maybe giving a little bit of a window into what might be happening with someone's mood, um, someone's way that they're able or not able to show up in a space. So, for example, someone comes in and they're kind of bouncing off the walls, and we say, "Oh, you know what? Just let's just take some breaths and calm down." So that is very well meaning and well intentioned, and I never want to shame anyone because you know what? That might be exactly what is needed for that student. For some people, though, saying things like "just calm down, just breathe," just implies that it's easy. Oh, just it's oh, this is easy. Anyone can do it. And breathe implies that that's actually accessible. One of the things we know about how trauma can impact bodies is that the diaphragm, for example, when we are in a heightened state of hyper awareness, when sort of in that fight or flight, we may be aware that we're in this state, but frankly, we may not be aware. And not to mention, there are like, I think up to 9 blended states. I mean, it's never like we're just in one, fight or flight, or we're just in parasympathetic. I mean, I think the research is sort of, again, just tipping the tip of the iceberg on this whole topic. So we don't know how this body is. But let's say, gosh, this person is really, maybe outside their window of capacity to be present. If I tell that body to just breathe, sometimes the diaphragm is like, well, that would be great if I could. If anybody's ever had a panic attack, this may be relevant. That would be great if I could breathe, but I can't breathe because what the body is doing in that moment is prioritizing running away over deep breathing. So when the body is prioritizing running away, the diaphragm, instead of being sort of that primary muscle of inhalation that is flexible, that is ready to, do its sort of up and down journey to promote oxygen, is like, hell no, we need to stabilize this spine. We need to prep this body for flight. WC, are you kidding me? So even having that awareness, it may not be trauma, right? It may be. I don't know. But the point is, in that moment, I might say, hey, it looks like your body wants to move. Is that true? I might, when in doubt, ask questions, right? And now sometimes questions can be overwhelming. I mean, that's the thing about this work. Everything you do is a both end, but you trust, I know that everyone listening is such a beautiful steward of your studio already. And you're already doing this work. So I'm sort of holding up a mirror of things you're already doing. Just asking them, what would feel more curious in this moment? Would you like to move? So just honoring what that body is doing in the moment, particularly side to side movement, we know can really help the diaphragm to come back into a state of more readiness, perhaps not breathing. Um, Another example might be someone who comes in, and this is a little bit more of an extreme example, but someone who comes in who does not have access to felt sensation in the body, and we might call this interoception. I don't feel emotion much. What do you mean feeling breath? What does that mean? Feeling resonance. I don't know what you mean by that. Often this can feel very frustrating to teachers because singing is a highly interoceptive activity. But for folks who are living in chronic stress, perhaps even chronic pain, going into the body is incredibly dangerous. We hear a lot of the body has wisdom, the body has wisdom, and that's very true. But the body also has some really dark, terrifying, painful things as well. I think we really have to hold that both and as practitioners working with bodies is that singing is not always a gift. Singing can be quite painful. for folks. And so if we can at least honor where they are right now, you want to move, you're in some pain. How can we make that feel more comfortable? Or, maybe there's not a way we can make that feel comfortable. How can I sit with that with you right now? These are small but quite powerful ways to honor that survival mechanism, that body is showing up as a fortress right now.
Those are great examples. And it makes me think about, my work is primarily with kids, tweens, and teens.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I feel like there's just this classic move in education around kids, which is a lack of movement, which is stop, be still. If you're
Really?
not being
Okay.
still, you're not listening. And kind of what I'm hearing you say is, and I think that there has been a shift, and I've seen the shift in education, where now they're taking movement breaks and stuff like that. And at the same time, what I think I'm hearing you say is really acknowledge the body as its own organism that's supporting this person, the whole person in front of you. And that if I see a child in front of me that's fidgeting or needs to move, like, maybe we lean in more, maybe actually. And I know from my own experience, this is what has worked well for me, is when I see kids fidgeting, my first thought is they need to move, and that could be 10 seconds of running or jumping jacks or whatever. But I love that you're asking us to think about asking them, hey, do you feel like you need to move? What is it you need to be more of a support and a guide?
Yeah. Maybe a little phrase, and this is taken from Amy Weintraub's work in Life Force Yoga. Meet the mood. How do I meet the mood? That's a great little question we can just kind of have in the back of our brain. I also want presence, Vielka. I'm a mom of a 2 and a 5-year-old. I also work mostly with adults. I don't work with children. And this has got to be so hard. I mean, as a mom, it's very hard for me to practice the things that I preach in my professional life sometimes because I'm just, I'm totally outside my window capacity to be present. So it's hard. I mean, this is really hard. I mean, I can sit here and very calmly talk about this, but I just want everybody to know I am into this because it's very hard for me. I don't do this because it's easy. I do it. It's sort of this weird, I don't know, like I'm really hard at it, but I'm like determined to maybe like make it a little easier. But lest you think that that I live my life in this like Zen place of meeting people's needs all the time, that it's absolutely incorrect.
Thanks for bringing the humanity to this
Oh
practice.
my gosh.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
really
Oh my
appreciate
gosh.
that.
So,
Yeah,
so
because this is really hard stuff, and it is a practice. And I think I love that you love challenges, is what I'm hearing you say. That you love the challenge of it, and I do too. I think that's what keeps me going, is that it is a challenge and it's constantly evolving. Myself, who's in front of me, just everything about it. I think that's,
yeah.
for me, a big part of the hook and the challenge of it. And then also what it can bring and the release. And oh gosh, there's so much. I'm like already sad. I want to do many parts with you, more than one, because there's so much to unpack here. I'm like, do I move on? Do I not? You know, yeah, let's move on to some other
Yeah.
aspects, even though I have so much more I want to dig into just with that alone. But I want to make sure that we touch upon what you label on your website as singing voice habilitation as opposed to rehabilitation. I was like, oh, that's an
Yeah.
interesting word choice. And I have never seen that like that before. I often think about vocal rehab. So tell us
Right.
about singing voice habilitation. Hab.
Exactly. So I will do just a brief little background. So a lot of folks right now might be familiar with places where you can become a registered vocalogist or a singing voice specialist. When I started this work, oh gosh, it's been a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago now. There wasn't as much information and access as there is now, which is great. It's a really growing field. Um, and so at the time, there was sort of this little bit of a rift between, okay, if you are working with a singer that has an injury, you have to be a speech therapist. If you are working in the singing world, you also need to. And there, I think a lot of people now who might still have that belief. Years ago, when I was like, gosh, I'm really fascinated by this. How can I learn more? I was so fortunate at the time to learn from Dr. Karen Wickland, who has since passed. She was a really seminal figure in my education around this topic. And Karen was sort of like, look, we need voice teachers that are equipped to handle folks that are coming from speech care into singing care. And her sort of idea, and which I think continues to maybe be a little controversial, was sort of if you're a speech therapist, but you've never taught voice lessons, like, and we're talking, hours and hours and hours of just sort of voice lessons to folks, how then are you able to potentially offer voice lessons in that way, in this sort of creative way that isn't, it doesn't build an insurance. It doesn't, it's sort of its own thing. You've got repertoire, you've got all kinds of other sort of artistic sort of considerations, and really present. There are so many speech therapists that are doing this beautifully. So I don't want to say that there aren't, but there are. But I think again, it's very much a both and. So the idea between rehabilitation is someone who has that sort of therapeutic offering. Very often insurance is involved, right? Where you're going to someone for rehab, physical therapy, speech therapy, that kind of thing. Habilitation is usually a term, even though it's associated with healthcare, it's more about learning. It's less about therapy, but maybe how to improve functioning that has on sort of this ongoing way, as opposed to improving function that has been lost, which is a little bit more of that therapeutic paradigm. It's a little bit sticky, and I will say there's I often like a little bit of gray area when you talk about this, but essentially I am not a speech therapist. I'm not offering sort of singing therapy. I don't use that word, even though certainly people might receive therapeutic benefit, but that's sort of for them to decide. I'm not sort of offering that. So what does that look like? Well, it's an awful lot of straw phonation, right, for a lot of folks, but it's also outside the box. I also work with folks for whom some of those tools, excuse me, they don't find helpful. And I think this is where the trauma piece comes into it. Very often when we experience PTSD, sort of, I'm doing air quotes here, traditional modes of recovery are not accessible for various reasons. So does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. And do you have some water? Do you need a little? Yeah. Feel free to take a water break. Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I was there when the conversation was just starting about singing voice specialist. And I love how you so carefully described the vibe. I would have been chosen some different words there of the vibe in the room. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and to be fair, I really never fully understood then because it was kind of emerging. And since I didn't go down that path the way you did, I still feel on the outside of it. And at the same time, I thought, well, this seems like it's really useful because for those of us who are in it, we know you really don't need to show anything to say that you're a voice teacher. Let's start there. Like, there is no test to pass. There's no degree you have to have. There's no anything around it, right? So you really get a wide range. So for me, just thinking, oh, wow, somebody has created a program where you can be a singing voice specialist and there's a sort of a credential to that and there's an understanding of what that means. I thought that sounds great. And certainly what you're saying about this idea of speech language therapists, that whole world are doing this great work, and we too can be addressing the same work, just kind of from this flip side of like, what do we do with our voice? We speak, we sing, like those are two major things. Somebody's already in this camp addressing the speech side of it, And then
Right.
why wouldn't we also have people who are helpers coming at it
Yes.
from the singing side? And I hear
Yes.
you because I think, yeah, you can have creativity on both sides. And since we're already on this side, obviously, as voice teachers, we're talking about, yeah, like, isn't it so fun to sing? And isn't it amazing that you can do all of these other aspects of singing and have that be helpful to you in so many ways,
Yeah.
emotionally, physically, the list goes on.
Yes. Um, yeah. And I think the one thing I would say too is, when I was first starting out, like everybody, it's sort of you're very by the book. You're like, okay, I can do these. Oh, this is hyperfunction or this is hypofunction. Okay, these are the things, and it was great. It's great. And the more clients I started to see, um, the more nuanced I got, and the more tools you get, and the more you're like, wow, this works for this person, but this person has the exact same diagnosis, and you know what? That is not going to work for this. And so all of the training in the world was not as beneficial as the people that and the relationships that I form along the way. And I think um, that that is key. I mean, I would say the same as just sort of my singing teacher hat, habilitation aside, just like learning to be with people and learning that they are not their diagnosis, and learning that how when we look at this whole person. And I was just say, like, for example, like straw formation is one. I've got a lot of people for whom that is just not going to fly for them. So what do? When the tool that you've been given is like, okay, well, you really have to think outside the box. And I think the gift of being on the singing teacher side is we aren't sort of beholden to insurance. I mean, that sounds kind of pragmatic, but I think it's true. Like, I don't have to code. I don't have to say what if I do some wacky off the wall thing with someone and you know what, it gets adduction. Hey, that's great. We write it down. It might not be evidence based, but it's experimental based. And I think that's what's so fun about it as well. Yeah. It's hard to talk about without feeling like, oh gosh, I think I'm going to offend somebody, or I don't think I said the right thing, because I think it is such an emergent field. And yeah, working with bodies is messy in any way.
Yeah. Can you give us an example here of like what's one of those tools that maybe really works most of the time, that is something that's really typical in your practice? And then where's a time where that tool didn't work and you're like, oh, and here's what I did instead? Is there something that comes to mind for you?
Well, I mean, can I give a both? I'll give you the both and, since we're talking about self-formation, I'll give you the both and for that. So a time that it has not worked. This is so I'm going to give a content warning here, because we're about to get for anybody watching or listening. This is a content warning for sexual abuse, and I hesitate to give it, but I'm going to, because I've seen this multiple times, so it seems really relevant. Um, for some people that I have worked with, anything involving, taking an instrument and like putting it in the mouth is an absolute no-go. I actually had someone have a quite a heightened emotional experience with that. It was very unexpected. It was unexpected to this person, and it brought them right back to a situation, right? And so I have had, and when this happened, this was the first time, and I thought, well, this is a one-off. I've had multiple experiences with folks with this situation. So, so what do we do? Well, you know what? Frankly, we don't even talk about breathing, because breathing in general is another one. For some people, the feeling of breath moving in the body, the sound of breath, is extraordinarily activating. And so, what do we do with that? Well, frankly, I don't talk about it. I just don't even touch it. We move. We find ways for that body to feel. First of all, agency. We haven't talked much about this, but as much as possible, I like to offer a menu. Like, what? Here's three ideas. Like, what might feel curious in this moment, and so we're working through it very sort of co-creatively. So that's one way. I like ditch it. I say, if the client says, and I'm also upfront. I say, look, if we are into something and you are like, Megan, this is the absolute worst thing you have ever asked me to do in my life, let's say no to that. Let's give a big old no to that, and we're going to celebrate that as actually part of the process. Not no is like, oh, a one-off and we discard and we feel bad and we go through a shame spiral because we gave the client something horrible. No, that's actually a really important part of skill building. Not only my capacity to be in discomfort, but this person's capacity to make like more effective choices around yes and no and what feels good in their body. So that would be that. Second, so straw phonation though can work really beautifully for folks. I mentioned earlier, some folks have a really hard time with interoception, like feeling breath or sound moving in the body. And I had a client a couple years ago. I talk about this client a lot because I think it's a great example of someone who did not came out who was transitioning late in life in her 70s. It was really beautiful, but this was a really painful thing as well. A lot of dissociation in the body, a lot of chronic pain. So the body was not safe. When prompted, I don't feel breath in my body. I don't feel sound. I'm not sure what you're talking about. So one day we pulled out the bubbles and we started blowing bubbles, and there was this realization of, I haven't done this since I was 5. So that brought a real curiosity. But then, oh my gosh, something inside of me is making bubbles happen. Now that seems pretty obvious to a lot of us, but for this person, that was pretty profound. And after a week of blowing bubbles, it became, you know what? I actually feel something at the tip of my lips, and there's bubbles out here. In other words, we have something outside the body to look at, to feel, that grounded us in the present moment, so that over time we could titrate the internal experience. We could go slow enough to the internal experience. Over a period of months, we were able to get, oh wow, there's sound moving inside my body, and there's sound sort of making this phenomena outside the body. So that's a case where straw phonation is actually like remarkable for this singer, and actually in a very different way than how we normally think about straw phonation as being sort of this tool for maybe onset coordination, pressure flow, and that was certainly happening. But actually, it was a curiosity tool for this person to learn about their body in a new way.
Those are such powerful, fascinating, and informative examples that you gave us. I'm really glad you shared, despite how hard it is to talk
hard
about some of these things. Wow. I mean, as I'm sitting here taking this in, I have so many thoughts. One is like, how long have you been practicing in this way now, Megan? Because this is, when you speak, it's so fluid for you. It's obvious that you have had so much experience, and thinking about somebody who's encountering this for the first time. First off, what can we even put into place? What are the tools, the practices, the strategies that you, knowing that your studio is so targeted and available and offering this space for those who are extra, have this sensitivity and you're almost calling out, right, for these people. You're like, and this incredible presence that's there for the world, and we're learning from you. And so for those of us who have not been that, in that, and obviously, like you said, 1 in 6 people, like maybe we have and we didn't know it, or so what have you learned? What are some tools, strategies, things that you put into place that maybe help let our students know that it's a safe place, and also for ourselves, I don't want to say prevent, because I loved how you took it in the direction of it's a learning experience for both of us, it is like essentially life is learning constantly, right?
It is.
But what are some things that can help us maybe get ahead a little bit, not feel like we're just, oh, surprise, that just came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Great. I totally, yes. How do we make those practical? So yeah. And yeah, to your point, like I see these examples are pretty intense, and that is I have a pretty large capacity for that. So I've been doing, I would say, trauma specific work for about 10 years now. But I think first of all, I would say, like, work on yourself. Like, well, that sounds I don't mean it, that feels, I don't know, I don't like how that sounded, but doing the work of what are the biases that I carry in my body. Look, I'm a white het cis woman. I'm continually sort of doing this work of like examining my identity and how that can come into like I am not a safe person for everyone. I just can't, I won't be. And I think knowing that we actually can't create a safe place for everybody that comes into our space, and that's not something that's bad, that's just bodies, like we don't want to hang with every person we meet, right? I mean, we're constantly kind of doing that work of, and so I think de-shaming this conversation by saying it's messy. I am going to say the wrong thing. I, you know, uh, like it's okay that there really aren't answers in this. So like just knowing that and that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools they have. I firmly believe that, you know,
I do
it's
too.
so
And
important.
I think, by the way, I just want to highlight that you said that because I can't remember when that came into my life. It's been a long time, and
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for it because it changes
Mhm.
everything. If you truly believe that everyone is doing their best,
They are. It does.
it changes everything. Like, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So I think for me that then the first thing is like noticing those shame spirals when we're with students, like, oh, I shouldn't have done it that, or I should have done it this way, or blah blah blah. A lot of should we should show, right?
Yeah.
We should all over ourselves. So noticing that, doing sort of your own work on your own identity and how that again kind of interfaces with the folks you come to contact with. Oppression, noticing how systemic oppression is present in your organization, in your institution, when we can't, you know, it is what it is. And how do we navigate the system when we have to work in the system and yet confront those things? So I think on a global level, like how can I contribute? How can I learn about myself? And then on a more practical level with students, knowing what the trauma informed principles are. So SAM, the substance and mental health abuse. I always get this wrong. Substance and mental health abuse association. Oh my gosh, Google Samtra, you'll get it. Trauma informed principles. They're right there. They give you sort of like a cursory. What's that? See, what's that like? The trauma informed person is like stumbling over the right thing, right? It happens to all of us with mom brain. Knowing what some of those principles are, and I will say they're a little bit different place to place. But the big one that I love in this is choice. Learning how you can just offer choice, choice, choice. Now, this can be overwhelming for folks. And I absolutely have students that come in and they're like, Megan, if you ask me to choose one more thing today, I just need you to tell me what to do. But that in itself is a choice, right? They want me to be like, great, this is what we're doing today. And they're like, awesome, let's do it. Noticing the power dynamic in the room and being able to say, how can I make this space more co-learning, more co-creative, where I am really curious about what you're interested in, even if we have to sing a jury, right? Even if my department is requiring that I do these things, even if we have an audition coming up and we do have these constraints, what are the choices available within the boundaries that we have? Offering a menu of, you know, do you want to warm up? You don't want to warm up? Great. Do you want to stand? Great. Do you want to bounce on this ball? Great. Um, Choice, I think just getting used to offering as many choices as you can is probably the single most important thing you can do in a playful way. Honoring no, being like, if you don't want to do this, that's awesome. Sometimes we have to do it. Okay, well, if you want to be in this show, we probably have to, you know, do this material today a little bit. But is there a way we can make that feel more fun? Because sometimes we have to do the no. And this is, I think, I'm talking a lot here, but one thing I think is people think that trauma informed care is like bubble wrapping everything. It's actually quite the opposite. It's getting in there and saying, how can we expand all of our capacity to be uncomfortable
Well,
and just live in that a little bit more compassionately without shame? Um, yeah.
wow. Um, I am loving this conversation so much. I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, oh no,
I
I'm
know.
sad that it's going to come to an end. But I want to highlight here that the power of choice and the uncomfortableness. I think it makes me think about what you're saying, expanding the uncomfortable, which is really not intuitive. I feel like that's very counterintuitive. And the bubble wrap made a lot of sense to me. I'm like, oh, I am okay. Let me get that bubble wrap. Let's stock up, actually, right? Because these are really intense topics. And it seems like that would be the go to. How can I, um, but in fact, what you're saying is expand the uncomfortable. We're co-learning, we're learning together. I imagine there's just a ton of, intention and heart and all of that behind it, right? When you're talking about this, um, expanding of the uncomfortableness. And it makes me think about how that is by definition growth in so many ways, right? Because everyone keeps talking about got to get out of the comfort zone if you're going to grow. And that's what you're really asking us to do here. Like actually invite that in, expand it, in a way that's slow
Yeah.
enough and not too much, too soon, too fast,
Yeah.
right?
And
Um,
even I would also say, like, even if growth for some people is like just be,
mm,
without doing shit. That is hard,
yeah,
I think, for voice people too. Is like, what's it like just to be in this moment and until this moment is complete?
yeah. Wow, and
That's
so
hard.
much. Yeah, I'm thinking about a student I taught in the past week who seemed especially lethargic, had almost the opposite body language that I'm used to having. And I'm just seeing that and exploring that and getting uncomfortable with it now as we speak in new eyes. Just like, oh, that's me. That's my
Yeah.
interpretation. And how can I expand that and accept that and remind myself that everyone's doing their best and take that on.
Yeah.
Not that I did something outside of that, but I think this is a kind of work that it's so reflective and it takes time.
Yeah. And Vielka, one other thing I'll plug for like practicality, have an accountability network, as a teacher, whether that's a therapist that you go to, whether that's a trusted group of friends you can go to and say, hey, this happened. And they're not just going to give you an appeasement answer. They're going to say, I mean, I'm so lucky. I have some friends I can go to and they're like, what have you thought about this? And it's very, again, it's accountability, it's peer support. Mental health has peer counseling. Therapists have, their um, counseling models within their own network. I think voice colleagues,
Yeah.
we need to have more of these spaces where we can talk about these things without feeling like we did something wrong or that the student is to blame. Sometimes there's things that like they are what they are, and how can we learn and have accountability for that?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'll just say quickly, that drops me right back into your session at Nats because the conversation you started in the room brought up major feelings for some people who really started. Somebody shared about, a case they had of the student that was just, and you could see the frustration that this person was having and that was so unresolved. And yeah, um, definitely see the need for that, like the therapist. I also want to highlight here. I mean, I think one of the greatest lessons I've learned, and as a parent, as a teacher, the idea of choice, and especially to our listeners who are focused mostly on kids, like I am. I mean, just by the nature of being a kid, you don't have a lot of agency, you don't have a lot of choice, you have all these limitations, you have all this power dynamic. Like, talk about all the things that we're being conscious of just by the fact of being kids, and I think it's something that's easily forgotten because we're so busy trying to just make sure kids stay alive and make it through.
Yeah.
That's no small feat. um yeah, so the practice of offering choice for as much as possible, what a game changer, especially with kids. Oh,
Yeah.
to choose every little thing. And just the fact that, like, okay, you're gonna wear school, clothes to school tomorrow. What do you want to wear? What's your choice? This
Yeah.
one, that one, offering choices, having them, and of course with singing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'll say, if anybody is, if you're crafty, I want to name one of my colleague and collaborative piano, Chris Harvest and Bogout and I at University of Louisville, little plug. We made a menu, like an actual menu. It says like, it's silly, it has like amuse bouche, and we have like some options for people. It's for their own practice. We have like appetizers, things they can do, and then we have like the main course, and they're just things that we do in the sessions together, but it's written down so that they can take it home with them and have. So it's silly, but I think just reinforcing in like a tangible way, yeah, like these are things you can choose day to day. Like your own practice can be a choice.
yes. Oh, I love that so much. And it's so interesting, right? How you can give all the same information of what we think is going to be helpful to their practice and having it be, instead of a should and very regimented, it can be all the same stuff
Yeah,
and just be presented in a way that's, because option,
yeah,
obviously there is the fact that we don't actually control anyone else.
Yeah. Dang it. Dang it.
So it's actually just like, here's what I can suggest and offer, and the menu.
Hmm.
Oh, I want to see this menu. That sounds
Oh,
amazing.
I'll send it to you. It's a work of
Oh,
art. We do so ourselves.
oh, I am sure it is. That's amazing. As we go to wrap up, I want
Uh-huh.
to share with our listeners your mini playlist. We had asked you to put together
Yeah.
5 songs that, yeah, that you feel represent you, or I don't know. That's
Yeah.
going to be the question. What are these songs? Why'd you choose these songs? Not necessarily going through one by one, but just as a
Sure.
whole, what does it say? So Megan's 5 songs were, and I was so surprised by the first one. I was like, wait, what? As I'm thinking about yoga and mindfulness, which we didn't even get into right now, but all of this world that you're coming from. Number one, Back in Black, AC/DC, caught me off guard, and also was like,
I, you
love.
know,
I love her even more.
I mean,
Number
it used to be okay. So when I was in grad school, it was like my recital. You're in black. Like it was my recital, like pump up song, and it just sticks. My kids love it. I don't know. I love hard rock. What
love
am I?
it.
What can I say? Like I'm a kid of the '80s, '90s. Like
Love it, love it, love it. Number two, Amsterdam, Coldplay. Number three was Country
mm,
Girl, Carolina Chocolate Drops.
yeah.
Four was Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. And number five, the Overture of Handel's Messiah. Let me say,
Um.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
tell us
Well,
more.
I'm a basic. Again, I'm a basic white girl of the '90s, so I love Coldplay. Chris Martin. If Chris Martin listens to your podcast, I'd love to chat. Let's see what else. Carolina Chocolate Drops. Again, I grew up in again Appalachia, and I just love Rihanna Giddens and everything, all the nuance that they're bringing to the genre. Yeah, it's brilliant. It speaks to my soul. I could sing Messiah it's cliche. I'm a low mezzo. I could sing Messiah every day and twice on Sunday, but I love the pifa. It gives me such joy. I have very specific, it's got to be a certain tempo. Anyway, I love it. It fills my soul. And it's just one of those things. I don't know.
I
And
love
saying like, I mean, the Bee Gees, come on. Like, it's one of my favorite, I got to move my body songs. And, yeah, so that's it.
love the mix. Okay, rapid round of
Hmm.
questions for you. You're just gonna come whatever comes to mind.
Yeah,
Just don't overthink it.
on my own thing.
Singing is blank.
Um, Practicing curiosity,
Hmm. Teaching is
relational.
you're nervous walking on stage. What's the first thing you do?
I swallow because I'm probably feeling pukey. And then I look up, I do a peripheral vision scan. So I look left and then right. Sometimes that can release dopamine and it can kind of just bring you a little bit more present. Not for everybody, but give it a whack.
I definitely will. That's fascinating. I've never heard that one before. Wow. Very cool. You're home alone. What piece do you love to perform when no one's listening?
Ooh, Barber's Nocturne. And oh gosh, okay, the Air Bomadish from the Matthew Passion. It's one of those like I haven't quite. Oh, it's like the one you're just like maybe one day. I don't have quite. It's not quite in my bones, but I just think all the time I love it.
Oh, what's an example of something ordinary you find extraordinary that you're grateful for?
Leaves. I love leaves. I love the change. I love sort of the life cycle and the grief of them. I love watching them come back. And I particularly love when you look up like on a trail and you see different colors of leaves peeking through the sky. I just find that really grounding.
Wow, that is so beautiful. I'm never going to look at a leaf the same way. It's beautiful. Finally, we're celebrating you. The sky's the limit. How do you want to celebrate?
You want to wiggle a little bit? You want to just dance and wiggle a little bit?
I
That's what
love
I would
it.
do.
I love it. Megan, thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy schedule and life to share this just incredible work that you're doing. I'm so inspired. I'm going to really be reflecting on everything you've shared with us. We're going to put your show notes here for the listeners and any resources, and we want to make them aware of any upcoming events. I know I saw one on your website already, and I was like, oh, this looks so good. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yes. So Unlearning Perfectionism with my colleague, Christine Kent, who's in Canada. We're doing a really fun and interactive workshop around perfectionism in voice spaces. Something else I'll plug is the Voice and Trauma Research and Connection group. We just launched our Patreon. We have all kinds of great content there if you're interested in learning more.
Oh, that's just incredible work. So fabulous. I'm so excited that I got to meet you. Thank you for all the work that
Thank
you've
you,
done,
Vielka.
for sharing it out. Every day I have a new appreciation for what it takes to do that. And I see you, and I really
Thank
value
you so much.
you and the work you're doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been such a
Likewise.
pleasure having you here.
What a gift. Thank you so much, Vielka. Take care.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining me for this podcast. To learn more about my step-by-step approach to voice education, where I've consolidated 30 years of vocal study into 4 words even a 3-year-old can do, just go to www.vielka.com. That's Vielka.com. Happy singing.